In my last video, it seems I stirred the pot a little bit by talking about who gets to call themselves like Gen X. And boy, did y'all have some strong opinions. Some of you are ready to form a tribunal over this. If you have to ask, you're not like Gen X, right? Well, the Gen X Council had our bi monthly meeting last week, and we decided there might be a few exceptions, but you definitely do have to meet certain criteria. And what might that criteria be? Well, perhaps the easiest answer to that is to talk just a little bit more about what makes one not like Gen X. If you don't know what it's like or even what it means to be a latchkey kid, probably not like Gen X. We didn't mind that title then, and today we know it made us who we are. We came home to an empty house, made our own snacks, and probably watched a few shows we weren't supposed to. You also might not be like Gen X if you didn't live for Saturday mornings before noon, because that was the only time we got to watch cartoons. We had no Cartoon Network, no on demand. We lived for those precious hours where it was nothing but cereal and Scooby Doo, or whatever happened to come on, since there was no real remote except for us and our 2 feet and hands. And if we were too tired, lazy, or both, whatever happened to be on one of our 13 channels at the time would do. Then it was outside with friends to explore the neighborhood, some school, some community playground, or some dirt road 2 miles away. We'd climb and swing and spin and jump from the highest point we could find. Then we'd speed down these metal baking pans fresh out of the oven that some people called slides. We'd burn our legs, our butts, and everything in between and think it was the best time ever. Then we'd hightail it to the BMX track or to the skating rink to push our luck some more. Our playgrounds were death traps, and we loved it. Even better, nobody cared where we were as long as we showed back up at home when the streetlights came on. Or if you were like me, when you heard your dad's 2 finger whistle. I could hear that whistle no matter where I was. If all that sounds weird or crazy or scary to you, you might not be like Gen X. And then there was our transportation. As Gen X kids, we rode in the back of trucks, no seatbelts, wind in our hair, kings and queens of the highway. Or we'd ride standing up or laying down wherever we could find space in cars that took up half the road. Sometimes we'd even perch in the deck of the back windshield, waving at the cars behind us. Safety? What's that? As you grew into your adolescent years, if you never saw teenagers legally smoking at school, sometimes with the teachers, might not be like Gen X. And speaking of school, talking back to teachers was a huge no. But many of us could leave campus whenever we wanted. And when we did, we were just as likely to see a jacked up truck with rifles on the back in the parking lot as a convertible with the top down. Nobody said a word. Nobody stole a thing. You also might not be like Gen X if, as a teen or preteen, even, you didn't consider going to the mall a night out. We'd walk around in circles or visit the arcade where we'd put quarters on the machine to show that we were next. Then we could walk away without worrying that someone would steal them. And when it was time for our turn, anyone would come find us over at Pac Man, Centipede, or Frogger. And when it comes to music, we had it so much different than today. Our first portable music format, aside from the radio, was the 8 track. It resembled this thick slice of toast, and we'd have to listen to songs all the way through because rewinding wasn't even a thing. But that was fine because for many of us, our music was everything. We went to concerts before we could legally drive and bang our heads with the best of them, including our parents. If that sounds awful to you, you might not be like Gen X. Also, MTV wasn't a thing when we were kids, but when it finally arrived, it was amazing. All videos, all the time. And we looked up to the VJs like they were the rock stars too. And just like we live for Saturdays, we live for Sundays, but for a different reason. Casey Kasem's Top 40. Don't touch that dial. We'd lay on the floor of our bedroom and listen all day long, only moving to get our cassette player so we could record the song we'd been waiting for, just to have the DJ talk over our favorite part. Any or all of this ringing a bell? If so, stick with me just a little bit longer because there are a few more signs that you might or might not be like Gen X. If you weren't left alone at 8 or babysitting the neighbor's kids by 10, you might not be like Gen X. If your mom or dad has never sent you to the store with a note to buy their cigarettes or alcohol, might not be like Gen X. If the thought of fresh Xerox test papers doesn't make you nostalgic for Spicoli and Ridgemont High, might not be like Gen X. If you were never terrorized by fitness tests in school PE where students and teachers made fun of you alike if you couldn't run a 10-minute mile, climb a rope hanging from the gym ceiling, or were too slow to be not pegged by the dodgeball, you might not be like Gen X. We had real competitions with winners and losers and participation trophies. Not a thing. You also might not be like Gen X if you don't recall the iconic phrase, be kind, rewind. And if you don't know what that relates to, and there's no possibility you ever held that treasured blue and white membership card, probably not like Gen X. And speaking of membership, you might not be like Gen X if you don't know how members only relates to a really cool piece of clothing that everyone had to have and not just something to do with the country club or the YMCA. Although that last part may not be the best example. And if you know, you know. If there is a digital record of most of the stupid stuff you did because you didn't grow up in a time where cameras were too big to carry around and your film could only be developed by shaking it, which often screwed it up, or dropped off at a store to be developed, and who could remember to do that, or if you did, to pay for it and pick it up? If none of that sounds familiar to you, might not be like Gen X. You also might not be like Gen X if you don't remember when CDs were something only rich people had in their bank accounts and not their cars. Or if you never read a map or a phone book, and if looking up something didn't mean pulling out one of 27 big leather bound books that were stored on a shelf somewhere in your house, might not be like Gen X. And if you can't recall not being able to talk on the phone and do anything else at the same time because the cord held you hostage, might not be like Gen X. If you don't know that the Brat Pack does not refer to kids down the street, but instead to the small group of really cool young actors that we looked up to, wanted to be, or to date, might not be like Gen X. If you didn't frequently build real forts outdoors and sleep in them without adult supervision, might not be like Gen X. If you don't know how or why or what a standard relates to when we're talking about automobiles, and you've never pop started a car, might not be like Gen X. And bonus points for your Gen X status if you can also unlock your car with a wire hanger or change a tire. No AAA required. So what do you think, my fellow Gen Xers? Those were some great times, right? Do we continue to gatekeep, or do we make a few exceptions here and there? Some of you were certain in your answers, but the jury was still out for others. Even we seem to be pretty divided when it comes to this question. So take just a minute, if you will, and let me know in the comments if you still hold your same opinion or if you've changed your mind, even just a little. No matter what, one thing I can say for certain after reading all the comments on the other video: Gen X still rules. Peace.